Welcome. Today we shall be looking at IELTS listening test. The IELTS listening question types on computer-based examination are the same as the ones on a paper-based examination. The IELTS listening test is designed to assess a wide range of listening skills, including how well you can understand main ideas and specific factual information, how you recognize opinions, attitudes, and purpose of the speaker, and how to follow development of an argument. You will face a variety of tasks in this test, for example, multiple choice questions, matching questions, plan, map or diagram labeling questions, form completion questions, note and table completion questions, flowchart completion, summary completion, and sentence completion, and also short answer questions. We shall look at each of these tasks as we go on. The IELTS listening paper has 4 parts with 10 questions in each part. Each question is 1 mark. The questions come in the same order as the information in the recording. Part 1 and Part 2 deals with everyday or social situations. In Part 1, there is a dialogue between 2 speakers, for example, a conversation about a travel arrangement or a person booking for an air ticket or for an accommodation. There's only one person who speaks in Part 2, therefore we have a monologue, for example, a speech about local facilities. And in Part 3 and 4, it deals with educational and training situations. In Part 3, there is a conversation between 2 main speakers, for example, 2 university students discussing a given assignment, perhaps being guided by a tutor. And in Part 4, there is only one person speaking, that is a monologue. And this person will be speaking on an academic subject, for example, a professor giving a lecture on ecology. You will hear the recordings only once, and in these recordings, different accents are used, for example, American accent, Australian or British accent. At the end of the test, you're given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. And at this point, you need to be very careful when you're writing your answers on the answer sheet because you lose marks for incorrect spelling and grammar. Generally, the IELTS listening test takes 30 minutes. What kind of task do you expect in IELTS listening test? In IELTS listening test, you expect to find a variety of task types and question formats. For example, you will face form completion, you have multiple choice questions, short answer questions, flowchart completions, sentence completion, table completion, labeling of diagrams, pictures, plans or maps, and you also might find a summary, note completion, and matching tasks. These questions might appear in any of the 4 sections, and remember, not all question types appear in any individual listening test. Let's start with IELTS listening part 1. In IELTS listening part 1, we said we have a conversation between 2 people set in an everyday social context. One person might be making a call for inquiries or booking for a service. So there is a caller and the other person is answering the call. Basically, it's like a question and answer session. The caller might also be requested to give his or her mobile numbers and be keen on how some numbers like zeros are pronounced. In this section, you hear names of people, addresses, phone numbers, names of places, and streets. And of importance to note is that sometimes the speaker may want to correct his or her information, so you need to be sure to correct yours as well. In this case, write both answers, then strike out the first one with a pencil later. This will save you the time of rubbing and risking losing the speaker. Just maintain their concentration and do not move around Do not start thinking of anything else at that point. Don't even start thinking how you pass or how you fail about this test. Then IELTS Listening Part 2. In most IELTS listening questions, we have directions as Part 2, either maps or pictures or a tour guide giving directions during a talk. There are 10 questions in this part, and there's always a starting point. So you need to ensure you get this starting point right. What we advise is maybe you can put a finger at the starting point on a paper so that you can easily follow the direction of the speaker. The speaker will then take you through the map or the tour using the direction words, for example, east, west, forward, right, far ahead, besides, directly opposite, and always confirm whether there is a compass direction and never assume that north is always on the top of the map. For direction words, for example, left and right, we assume that you're driving. So when the speaker turns right, you also turn right. When the speaker turns left, you turn also left. And at this point, you need to be familiar with some map vocabularies, for example, directly opposite, right in front of, besides, just behind, and many others. You also need to follow keenly right from the start. Read quickly through the main features of the map before the audio plays so that you can familiarize yourself with the main features. So at this point, whenever you miss a word, just focus ahead. Whenever you miss a word, just focus ahead so that you won't miss more and more words. Just find where the speaker is and move on. In IELTS Listening Part 2, we have some of the tips to help you in labeling the maps or the diagrams. I know map labeling is kind of tricky question here, and one of the tips that you need to use is that you need to know the starting point. Identify the direction. Either they'll be using a compass or they'll be using direction words, for example, ahead, forward, besides, and such words. So if you're given a map, check if you have a compass direction. Point with your finger on the starting point and follow the speaker as he or she goes around. Follow the directions with your finger as you read the questions at the same time as you answer them. How do you answer questions in Listening Part 2? As a test taker, you're required to write your answers on the question paper as they listen. At the end of the test, you're then given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. So you need to take care when writing your answers on the answer sheet, as poor spelling and grammar are penalized. And then the third part of IELTS listening is Part 3. And in this part, we deal with educational and training situations where there is a conversation between two main speakers, for example, two university students discussing a given topic or an assignment, and perhaps they're being guided by a lecturer or a tutor or a professor. The problem here is getting to know who is the first student, who is the second student, and who is the tutor or the lecturer. Ensure you get such information by being keen on their names, and introductory statements usually give you a hint of who is who. And mostly, the two voices are of different genders, so this will help you in identifying the speakers. Then you have to listen to each person and follow the discussion. Most of the IELTS candidates get confused at this point. So do not worry, because you'll always be given a minute to read the questions ahead before listening to the audio at that part. Another point to note is that in this conversation, one student might say something and later on correct it, and therefore be keen on this. Just like the other parts of listening, this part has 10 questions of varying question types, and each question is equivalent to 1 mark. The flow of question is usually sequential and in line with the recording. However, at this point, the difficulty level of the question increases. And of importance to note is that there may be breaks in between this part, Part 2, and also Part 1. And lastly, we move to IELTS Listening Part 4. The IELTS Listening Part 4 is a monologue conversation where only one person speaks on an academic subject. At this point, it can be a professor or a lecturer giving a lecture on topics, for example, ecology or environmental or climate changes. The topics in this part are of varied nature but from academic backgrounds, and it might be either a continuation of part 3 or a totally different topic. The speaker is a bit faster here and you need to concentrate. Make use of pauses to read ahead, as this enables you to predict what the speaker is about to say next. Always write what you can hear, and later on in the extra 10 minutes you can make corrections. In this extra 10 minutes you read the whole sentence and identify the appropriate word. If you focus on making corrections where the audio plays, then you miss more words. And remember, in IELTS Listening Part 4 there is no break, as it was in the previous parts, and so you need to be very keen in this section. There are 10 questions in this part, and each question again has 1 mark. What are the type of questions in IELTS Listening? The first type of question is a multiple choice question. In this type, you may be given a question with 3 possible answers or the first half of a sentence with 3 possible sentence ending. You have to choose one of the correct answer A, B or C, and then you write the correct letter on the answer sheet. Remember, you're writing the correct, not the full wording. Sometimes you're given a longer list of possible answers and you have to choose more than one answer. You should read the question carefully to check how many answers you need to choose, and this type of question tests mainly listening skills. For example, a detailed understanding of specific points or a general understanding of the main points of the recording, and there's no specific number of these type of questions because their number in the IELTS listening test varies. The next question type is the matching questions. In this type of question, you have to match a list of items from the recording to a list of options on the question paper. Then you write the correct letter again on the answer sheet. This type of question tests your ability to listen for detailed information. For example, whether you can understand information about the type of hotel or guest house accommodation in an everyday conversation, following a conversation between 2 people, and recognizing how facts in the recording are connected to each other. The third type of question is the plan or map or diagram labeling. This type, you have to complete the labels on a visual image, which may be either a diagram, a set of pictures, a plan, or a map. You may have to select your answers from a list of the question papers. You may have to select your answers from a list on the question paper and then write the correct letter on the answer sheet, or select words from the recording that fit into the gaps of the question paper. In this case, you will need to keep on to the word limit given in the instructions. You do not have to change the words in the recording in any way. You just write the same way they are. You should read instructions very carefully, as the number of words or numbers you may use to fill the gaps can change. A word limit is given in this one. For example, you may be told to write no more than 2 words or a number. And remember, contracted words, for example, there, will not be tested in this point. Hyphenated words, for example, check in, check out, count as a single word. This type of question tests your ability to understand, for example, a description of a place and how this description relates to the visual. It may also test your ability to understand explanations or where things are and following directions. Another type of question you find in IELTS listening is the form or note, table, flowchart or summary completion question. In this type of question, you have to fill in gaps in an outline or part of the recording. The outline will focus on the main ideas or facts in the recording, and they may be either a form used for facts such as names, a set of notes that is used to summarize information, a table, and in a table used to summarize information that can be divided into clear categories, for example places, times, prices, and all such, or a flowchart. In a flowchart, remember, use it to summarize stages in a process with the direction of a process shown by arrows. In this type of questions, you may need to select your answers from a list in the question paper and then write the correct letter on the answer sheet, or select words from the recording which fit into the gaps on the question paper. And remember, keep to the word limit that you are given in the instructions. You do not have to change the words in the recording in any way. You just have to write the way they are. And as an emphasis, you need to read the instructions very carefully. So this type of question focuses on the main points on the person listening would naturally write down. The fifth type of question is the sentence completion. This type of question, you have to read sentences that summarize important information from either or of the listening text or from one part of it. You have to fill in the gaps in each sentence using information from the recording, and you should include them. And remember, and again, you need to read the instructions very carefully, as the number of words or numbers that you need to use to fill the gaps may change. This type of questions focuses on the ability to identify important information in a recording. Also, you may need to understand relationships between ideas, facts, events, for example, the causes and effects. The sixth type of question is the short answer question. This type of question, you have to read the question and write a short answer using information from the recording. You should read the instructions very carefully to know the number of words or numbers you need to use to fill the gaps. Remember, a word limit is given. Sometimes you are given a question that asks you to write 2 or 3 different answers. And in this type of question, you're being assessed on the ability to reason for facts, for example places, prices, times that are heard in the recording. What are the tips for you to score well in IELTS listening test? Number 1, you need to read the instructions for each task carefully. This one will help you check the maximum number of words that you're required to use. After a short introduction, the speaker on the recording tells you that you have around 30 seconds to read the task. Use this time to study the questions very fast. And make sure you understand what you have to do. Think about the situation or the context and try to guess what the vocabulary you might hear, and underline or highlight keywords. Also predict answers. In this particular test, try and identify what type of word you're listening for, the names, numbers, places, and what part of speech, for example nouns, verb, and adjective, because this one will help you in predicting the answers. Remember, listening effectively does not mean you need to understand every single word you hear. In fact, you should not even try to understand these words. Do not panic if you do not understand each word. Be careful when you transfer your answers to the answer sheet at the end, because you need to check for the spelling and basic grammar. Especially, be careful to write down when you're writing plural forms of nouns or when necessary. Make sure you include symbols, for example decimal points for numbers and currency symbols for money. And one final tip is that if you lose your place completely during the listening, notice when other candidates turn over the page in their booklets and do the same. And while you are listening, listen for signposting words. These are languages, for example, secondly, most importantly, and such. Be aware of synonyms or words with similar meanings. Answer items are often pronounced clearly, stressed, or repeated by the speaker. Do not automatically write the first thing you hear. That sounds right. There are sometimes distractors on the listening test. This is the time when you find a listener or a speaker correcting what they have said previously. While you're listening, do not try and write down everything you hear. You can save time while you're listening by writing abbreviations. However, when you write the word in full or use the standard abbreviation to transfer your answers, write the words in full. When you're given a diagram or map or a process or a flowchart, it is absolutely essential to locate your starting point first. And again, do not write more than the maximum number of words or letters that you are required to do, because this one will be a penalty. It is better to guess than to leave the answers blank, because you not lose a mark for a wrong answer.